This is part one of a two-part response to Sargon's video defending his petition to ban social justice courses in universities, paying particular attention to the role that he thinks government should play. We're going to look at some clips and then respond to them.
This is not a free speech issue, right? Free speech is a political concept. It's about the right to express any political view and not have consequences done to you, right? So you can say, I disagree with government policy, I disagree with identity politics, I disagree with anything political, and you shouldn't be fired or oppressed in any way. That's what free speech is, and I totally agree.
This is a ludicrously narrow definition of the freedom of speech. It finds absolutely no basis in the American Constitution, and I suspect that it has no basis in the British unwritten way of doing things either. The freedom of speech is about quite a lot more than just freedom of political speech. He mischaracterizes this freedom in another way as well. He says that you should be able to say whatever you want politically and not face consequences, like you shouldn't lose your job. But that is precisely not what the freedom of speech means. If in the US I have certain political views, I can be fired from my job because I have those views. Political opinions are not protected in that way. So it seems like he's fundamentally misconceived what the freedom of speech means. And I think this is a problem that we'll see going forward.
People aren't thinking critically of their educators. They're there to be educated, to learn what that person has to say. They said that they're taking it in as if it's true. That's what they do in every fucking course. Think about when you went to university. You know, just the students, and we know that this is true. There are thousands of these people who now believe that all white people are racist.
So this is a particularly revealing clip. Sargon here is saying that people who are being educated are not thinking critically because they're being educated, right? They're coming there to hear information and to take in information, not to critically assess that information. This is precisely the opposite of how I was educated. And I think it's not the right way to educate anyone. And if this is how people perceive their educations, that needs to change. I was taught to always question all of the information that I was presented. I was always taught to verify with secondary sources and primary sources whatever information was presented to me by professors. So if there's an issue here, it's not that the government needs to come in and ensure the soundness of information that students should just drink without question. It's that students need to critically analyze the information that they're presented. If they can't do that, they shouldn't be in college. This is I feel this is so basic, I'm almost being trolled. Sargon just told us that students do not take in information critically, and presumably that they shouldn't because they're there to take in information. What the fuck? Basically, it seems like Sargon has an incorrect impression of the purpose and the methodology that sits behind Western college education. If students aren't critically analyzing the information they're presented, the solution is not government enforcement of intellectual hygiene. The solution is teaching students to think critically.
So at 4:15 he says, you're putting corporate universities in a position of which they can dictate what is deemed by the state to be acceptable or unacceptable forms of education. Yeah. Why is that bad? Why is it bad for them to use the scientific method and say, okay, well, these things aren't an acceptable form of education because they're not true? I mean, they don't teach flat earth theory. You know, they don't teach creationism. They don't teach homeopathy. They don't teach Scientology, because all of these things are horseshit.
Yes, Sargon, very good. I'm glad you realize we don't teach flat earth theory. But you don't seem to have understood why we don't teach flat earth theory. We don't teach flat earth theory because people in universities decided that it was horseshit. The government didn't come in and say that it's horseshit, therefore people in universities shouldn't teach it. Now, all these things seem obvious to us now, but they weren't then. The government is not competent to tell universities what universities should teach. That is the business of universities. We'll talk in a moment about why the government shouldn't be in the business of telling private entities how or what they can say at all. But you're putting the cart before the horse here. Universities made that determination. When governments determine what universities can teach, look back at history. Look at China, look at Russia, look at any place where government administration has exercised control over educational standards and content. And you'll see that the ideas that people are forced to teach are retrograde, because the people who are best placed to decide what to teach are the people at universities, not fucking elected government administrators who are elected for reasons that have nothing to do with their intellectual, educational, or otherwise mental prowess.
Maybe we'd have to take it higher. Maybe it'd have to go to the government. But again, I'm not a libertarian. I don't think government's an evil entity. I think it's a tool that can be used or misused, like a gun. And I think it is there to do certain things. And if required, yes, I would definitely go to the government and say, look, ban social justice courses in universities. Or at least, at the very least, like I'm petitioning, suspend them so they can be reviewed and overhauled and the misinformation taken out and genuine information being put in. Take them out of the record chambers, anything. I don't mind the government doing this. It's okay. It's not wrong for the government to do this. It's okay. It's regulation.
Sargon, this is so basic, I can't believe I even have to say it. If you give the government the power to police the speech of private entities, there is no guarantee that that power will not be turned against you. There is nothing about the truth which is special, such that it protects you from people getting it wrong. Right? You talk about intellectual hygiene standards.
In the same way, I personally wouldn't be protesting the government regulation of restaurants and hygiene standards. This is effectively the same thing for academia, intellectual hygiene standards. This is horseshit. My food is filled with shit.
But you seem to be completely unaware of the possibility that people can get hygiene wrong. And this is funny to me because the very existence of SJWism and feminism clearly demonstrate that people get hygiene wrong quite a lot. So who knows if today your petition passes, but tomorrow the government decides that you need to be cleansed, right? Anytime you talk about intellectual hygiene standards and giving the government the power to decide what is intellectually hygienic, red flags should be popping up everywhere. This is Soviet-style shit. This is not what I would expect to hear out of the mouth of someone who claims to be a liberal. Sargon, in general, I like you, but on this issue, you are
filled with shit.
I'm sorry, I couldn't resist. Thanks for watching. For a kind of more thorough, or at least less fragmented take on this whole situation, please see the remainder of this video, which is just kind of a monologue where I talk in more depth about the situation with Sargon. Thanks for watching. If you end here, I don't blame you, and I'll talk to you soon. Bye-bye. I wanted to make this quick reply to Sargon's video on banning social justice courses, just to add my voice to the chorus of people in opposition to some of the ideas expressed in his video. From the jump, I'm happy to agree that propaganda should not be taught. Of course, such courses shouldn't be taught. The only issue is how to stop them. Petitions, boycotts, rallies, all of these are fine. However, the power of government should never be used to prohibit this kind of speech. Historically, universities themselves are the only bodies that have been deemed competent to decide what they teach, and this is as it should be. You never want to give the government the power to decide what private entities can say to other private entities. That empowering government in this way is potentially catastrophic should be completely obvious to anyone who has spent any time on issues of social justice or feminism. We can even leave aside the idea that it is immoral to use violence, police with guns, to prevent non-violent actions, professors with tongues, since, depending on your ideological stance, you don't necessarily have a problem with this. Instead, we can talk about the simple and practical reality about what such government empowerment would mean. Sargon, the social justice warriors and feminists will achieve the critical mass necessary to use government force against what they deem to be untruth first. You don't seem to understand that what's true is less important here than what people deem to be true. And people, as we can see because of this entire movement, are often deceived. They're often mistaken, even in large numbers, and sometimes especially in large numbers. Once you give the government this power, the power to enforce intellectual hygiene standards, to quote you, there is nothing to prevent them from misunderstanding what hygiene means. There is no shield inherent in actual truth that can protect us. As a result, this power is unsafe in any hands. Give them the power to regulate speech in private universities, and you simply forge the tools of your own destruction. To quote Hitchens, you make a rod for your own back. This is pretty basic, and I'm honestly quite surprised that you're okay with the use of government power in this area. It's pretty much free speech 101. You should spend some more time thinking about this concept, since, from your other video, you seem to think that free speech is only meant to create a space for consequence-free political speech. Free speech is about quite a lot more than that, as is the freedom of association guaranteed in the American Constitution. Anyway, pushing for government-enforced intellectual hygiene standards is the worst kind of blind, and would violate both our freedom of speech and our freedom of association. Now, there's another bad idea that came up again and again in this video, and this one is a bit more subtle. It's this idea that there is somehow a libertarian ideological lens that makes it difficult for libertarians to exercise sound judgment. Everything in this world is viewed through an ideological lens. It is impossible not to have one. In Sargon's case, he sees the world through a liberal, statist, ideological lens, which he views as normal. As a result, he's blind to his own ideology. Libertarian and statist lenses are, a priori, of equal validity. Certainly, the libertarian worldview should not be simply dismissed as a, quote, lens, while the statist worldview is accepted as normal. By repeatedly insisting that he is occupying some sort of ideologically neutral default ground, Sargon is begging the question. The entire debate, really, is about the appropriate use of government force. You cannot try and win the debate simply by insisting that this isn't a free speech issue, and by repeatedly asserting that the government can and should use force in this way. That's an ideologically pregnant position to take, like it or not. It's a very common ideological stance, but the fact that something is common doesn't make it any less ideological. The commonness of the view just serves to blind those who hold it to its true ideological nature. For me, there are two takeaways here. Real thoughtfulness and consistency are rare things indeed. Even if there were no moral problem with using violence to stop nonviolence, the practical dangers of empowering the government in this way are overwhelming. Given Sargon's thoughtfulness in other ways and on other issues, I'm really surprised at this. It's a bit like watching a college student struggle to fit a square block into a round hole. Last, we have to be constantly aware of our own ideologies. Sargon's ideology blindness. Feminism is an ideology. Libertarianism is an ideology. Anarchy is an ideology. But Sargon's liberalism, just a scientifically valid way to view the world, is extremely common. We must guard against it in ourselves and not tolerate it in others. Some ideologies are, in fact, better than others. Some conform more or less well to reality. But we all have them, and having one is necessary if you want to interpret the world at all. Statists and libertarians, and liberals and feminists and anarchists and Marxists, all have fundamentally different axioms, fundamentally different first principles. Marxism and feminism fall to pieces when you examine their first principles. These systems of thought do not possess worthy axioms, which is why we reject them. Libertarianism and statism are harder cases. We can and should debate about which set of axioms is better. What you cannot honestly do is pretend that the axioms of libertarians are any less fundamental, and therefore less valid, than the statist axioms you hold so dear. Doing so is simply begging the question. To even have a worthwhile argument, you have to attack the worthiness of my axioms, not just restate your conclusion sincerely into a camera. Thanks for watching. This is Translator's Troubles, signing off.